Don't touch my keyboard with those filthy hands. The sharp command sliced through the elegant stillness of the upscale cafe in the heart of Silicon Harbor's tech district. Crystal glasses on the counter trembled softly as silence swept the room. Ethan Voss, 36 years old, CEO of Voss Logic, the most celebrated artificial intelligence company in America, stood tall behind the counter like a modern-day monarch. Facing him was Amara Cole, 28, the morning janitor, still holding a damp cloth stained with coffee. She said nothing, simply took a step back, but her eyes never left the laptop that had sparked his fury. Ethan lifted the silver computer, turning it toward the crowd of customers sipping cappuccinos. "This is the Genesis Code," he announced, his tone a blend of pride and mockery. "An algorithm no one but me can comprehend. It's the foundation for the next generation of AI. She almost spilled coffee on it." He smirked and shook his head. "If you can fix just one line of this code, I'll give you the entire company." A few people laughed, uncertain whether it was genuine amusement or polite conformity. Amara bowed her head, wiping the table, but her eyes flicked to the lines of code scrolling across the screen. Something sparked. In the nested loop structure, she spotted an inverted symbol in the boundary expression. Her pulse quickened. There was no mistake. It was an error, simple yet catastrophic one, that could cause the entire algorithm to collapse when run on a quantum framework. But she stayed silent. She quietly wiped the last drop of coffee and murmured, "I'm sorry." Ethan shook his head and pushed his full espresso cup toward her. The liquid spilled across the table, cascading onto the floor in a long, dark streak. "Clean it up. That's what you do best." He turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving behind a heavy silence. Amara knelt dabbing at the spilled coffee. The bitter scent filled her throat like something she couldn't swallow. A few employees glanced at her with pity, while some customers pretended not to see. But she didn't care. The code still burned vividly in her mind, every line, every symbol perfectly etched into memory. She stood and walked into the small storage room behind the counter. The narrow space flickered under a weak fluorescent light. Amara sat on a wooden chair, pulled out her old cracked phone, and opened the Notes app. Her fingers moved fast, almost mechanical, as if her body itself were a machine built for this purpose. Each symbol, each formula appeared flawlessly. When the final line was complete, she stopped and took a deep breath. It was real. The error existed. She flipped through old drafts and found the same reversed loop model, unstandardized logic. She had written a research paper about that exact flaw back when she was at MIT before everything fell apart. Amara had once been among the brightest graduate students in MIT's computer science program, predicted to become a pioneer in quantum security. But then her mother was diagnosed with terminal liver cancer. Her father had been gone for years, her younger brother still in high school. Tuition, hospital bills, rent, they all crashed down like an avalanche. She dropped out and took every job she could find, waiting tables, delivering packages, cleaning floors just to keep a roof over their heads. She never told anyone, because she knew no one would care. But she had never forgotten how to code. Her mind remained a sharp blade wrapped in silence. And this morning she had seen the weakness in the code that the entire tech world worshipped. Rain drummed softly on the tin roof above. She looked up, a cold droplet landing on her hand. Yet her heart was burning. Something was awakening inside her, not anger, but clarity. She no longer feared Ethan Voss. She no longer felt small. She stood, slipped her phone into her pocket, opened the door and stepped back into the cafe. The patrons had already forgotten what happened. They chatted about stocks technology and Ethan's name on Forbes magazine. No one noticed the young woman walking past them, eyes glowing like fire, carrying in her mind the code that would change everything. And none of them knew the game had already begun. A week after the confrontation at the cafe, the world seemed to have moved on, but Amara hadn't. In her small rented room on the fourth floor of an old building in South Silicon Harbor, she sat alone beside a cracked screen laptop. Outside, the early seasonal winds carried a fine mist of rain. The city glowed with neon light, but her room was lit only by the faint blue shimmer from the monitor. On the screen was a file named G-Code Rev 1. Over the past 3 days, she had rewritten the entire Genesis code algorithm from memory. She had no professional simulation software, no powerful server to test it, but every line of code felt hauntingly familiar. And right at the 7th loop, she saw it a reversed sign in the scalar time variable, a tiny slip that sent the entire algorithm off course. It wasn't intuition. It was certainty. Amara sat motionless, her eyes wide, her hand resting loosely at her side. One thought echoed in her mind: if she was right. If that error truly undermined the foundation of Genesis code, then an entire industry could tremble. The phone rang. The screen displayed a name she hadn't seen in years: Miles Latner. She hesitated, then answered. Amara. His warm voice carried a note of surprise. I couldn't believe it when I saw your name. You're listed in the Open Challenge at the Global Algorithm Summit. She gave a tired smile, her voice hoarse from sleepless nights. You still keep up with the conference? Of course. I'm a technical advisor for the organizers this year. But are you really entering as a freelancer? It's not about the prize, she said quietly. I just want to see if a janitor can correct the mistake of a so-called genius. Miles was silent for a long moment before replying softly. Ethan Voss isn't someone who plays fair. If he finds out you studied at MIT, he won't take this lightly. Amara turned toward the window where raindrops broke into streaks against the fogged glass. I'm not an MIT student anymore, and I have nothing left to lose. She hung up, stood, and drew the curtains shut. On the table lay a printed registration form. Beneath her name, a single line was written in bold: independent contestant, no sponsor. Across town in the grand Halden Convention Center, hundreds of the brightest minds in technology were gathering. Outside, a massive banner hung across the glass facade: Global Algorithm Summit, the Battle of Brilliant Minds. Inside, reporters crowded the Voss Logic Pavilion. All eyes turned to Ethan Voss, seated confidently in a leather chair, sunglasses perched on his head, his trademark smirk never leaving his face. A CNN reporter asked, "Do you think anyone this year stands a chance at finding a flaw in the Genesis code?" Ethan gave a faint, dismissive smile. No one. I've opened this challenge 3 years in a row. Teams from Stanford, MIT, Caltech all failed. Most people sign up just to test their luck. And if someone actually finds the flaw, Ethan narrowed his eyes, half amused, half contemptuous. Then I'll rewrite my entire career. The remark went viral on Twitter within minutes, accompanied by a new hashtag, #ChGenesis_impossible. Millions of shares flooded in under an hour. Back at the cafe, where Amara used to work, whispers spread quickly. She really signed up, one employee murmured. Is she insane? Challenging Ethan Voss at the biggest tech summit on the planet? The manager, Yeppe, snorted. If that girl can code, then I'm a math professor. But to Amara, none of it was funny. She knew she was walking into a place where no one was waiting for her, but that also meant she was bound by nothing. 7 years ago, she had walked into MIT with torn jeans and a full scholarship. 3 years later, she dropped out when her mother was hospitalized, leaving no one to care for her autistic brother. She had traded her future to save her family. But her memory, her skill, and her instinct for mathematics had never left her. She reviewed the algorithm's structure one last time. Each time she looked at that flaw, one question returned. Why hadn't anyone noticed? Was it truly impossible, or had everyone been looking in the wrong direction? Amara inhaled deeply, closed her laptop, and slid it into her backpack. She carried little else. She didn't need approval or recognition, just one chance. Because she knew truth often hides in silence, and genius often comes from where no one thinks to look. Tomorrow she would walk into a room filled with tailored suits and prestigious titles. No one would pay attention to the woman in a thin jacket moving quietly toward the stage. But she would make them look. Amara once believed MIT was where dreams began. At 18, when she received her acceptance letter to the computer science program, her mother held her and cried. "You're the first in our family to ever go to college," she whispered through tears. 3 years later, Amara had become one of the Institute's brightest students. She was chosen as a research assistant in the AI lab and once presented a paper on quantum algorithms that left the entire faculty board in stunned silence. She wasn't loud or showy, but everyone remembered her for her sharp mind and uncanny programming intuition. Then her mother fell ill, acute liver failure. The transplant surgery would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Amara applied for emergency aid, but the only reply she received was, "We're sorry, there's nothing we can do." She packed her things and quietly left MIT, returning to South Baldwin. She worked nights as a waitress, mornings as a cleaner, scraping together every dollar for hospital bills and for her younger brother Malik, who lived with autism. 3 years passed. No degree, no scholarship, no chance to return. When she applied for a janitorial job at Leclerc Cafe, the manager, Yeppe, squinted at her resume. "Where did you study MIT? And now you're holding a cleaning rag. I need the money." He didn't ask anything else. She didn't explain. But every night after work, Amara sat in front of her cracked laptop, typing lines of code not to publish, not for recognition, but to remind herself who she once was. One evening, Malik sat beside her and asked softly, "You're still a scientist, right?" She froze for a moment, then nodded. "I'll always be a scientist." From then on, above her desk, she taped a small note. "Create something the world has never seen." Then came that morning. Ethan Voss, the tech tycoon and CEO of Voss Logic, walked into Leclerc wearing the arrogance of power. When Amara accidentally brushed the keyboard of his open laptop, he growled, "Stay away from my computer. Do you have any idea what it's worth?" He flipped the screen toward her, tapping on rows of glowing green code, Genesis code. 3 years of research. No university has managed to break it. If you can fix one line, I'll give you the entire company. The cafe erupted in laughter. Amara stayed silent. But as she wiped the table, her eyes caught a glaring mistake, an inverted sign that would destabilize the entire algorithm. A simple error, a fatal flaw. That night, she reopened her temporary memory files and retyped the entire segment from memory. The faulty loop was at line 7, just as she'd seen. She checked 3 times. It was still there, She messaged Miles, her old classmate from MIT, now part of the Global Algorithm Summit's organizing team. Miles, what would you think if I entered Voss's code challenge? His reply came quickly. You're not serious, are you? Amara Ethan will crush you if you can't prove anything. I don't want the money. I want the truth to be seen. Miles didn't reply again. The next day, Amara printed her online registration form. Beneath her name in red letters, the system automatically displayed independent contestant, no sponsor. She stared at that line for a long time, then smiled. She didn't need anyone's backing, just one chance to stand up. That flaw, small yet catastrophic, could force an entire tech empire to start over. And if she had the courage to expose it before the world, no one could ever deny one thing: she was a scientist, even if her hands once held a rag. That morning, the sky was gray. Cold wind whipped across the plaza in front of the Halden Convention Center, where hundreds of tech professionals were arriving for the Global Algorithm Summit. Amara stood at the side entrance holding her contestant badge printed with bold red letters, independent participant, no sponsor. Inside the main hall, people wore badges from MIT, Stanford, Caltech. She, in her faded shirt and carrying an old laptop in her backpack, clearly did not belong there. The check-in staff gave her a hesitant look. This is the open challenge category. Are you sure you want to proceed? She nodded. I'm sure. The testing room was small, 8 participants seated apart from each other. They were doctors, professors, AI specialists. When the screen displayed the challenge prompt, find the error in the Genesis code. Time limit. 60 minutes. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Chief Judge Professor Leona Frost entered, her voice calm but commanding. She had once been Ethan Voss's mentor, the creator of the Genesis code. We're not looking for the fastest, she said. We're looking for the one who sees what others cannot. The timer began to count down. Lines of green code filled the screen, over 300 in total. Everyone bent over their keyboards, typing rapidly. Everyone except Amara. She closed her eyes. She didn't need to study the code closely. She had already memorized every line, every symbol from the week before. At line 79, the flaw remained a reversed sign within a loop that threw the entire model off balance. She opened her laptop and typed a simplified simulation. But instead of continuing to code, she pulled out a piece of paper, the back of her contestant badge, and began sketching the data flow diagram. Like tracing the movement of water, she drew how a single misaligned rhythm could clog the entire system. One of the judges glanced over, puzzled. Are you drawing? She nodded. I need to see the whole picture. Time passed. Some contestants began submitting their solutions. They pointed to errors and expressions, redundant structures, input data inconsistencies. All reasonable. Yet none of them touched line 79. 15 minutes remained. Amara stood and handed in her file, the Genesis code, with one single change. A judge frowned. You just replaced a minus sign with a plus, yes, she replied, and adjusted the simulation model accordingly. If you're wrong, you'll be disqualified. I know. But if I'm right, his quantum framework will have to be rewritten. The air in the room froze. When they ran the test on her modified code, the data stream appeared smooth, stable, flawless. No errors, no warnings, no deviations. Silence filled the room. Leona stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with rare intrigue. What did you see that the others didn't? Amara answered softly. I didn't read the code. I listened to its rhythm. One of the contestants chuckled. And what do you do outside of programming? She looked up without hesitation. "I'm a janitor." The room went completely still, not from disbelief, not from shame, but from the realization that she had just shattered an invisible wall, a barrier that had long kept ordinary people from touching the sacred code of giants. 2 hours after the challenge ended, social media exploded. The hashtag Waitress cracks Genesis topped global trends. A woman with no degree, no research team had corrected a single line of code, and the entire tech world was forced to take notice. But Amara said nothing. She shut off her computer and quietly returned to her small rented room far from the noise. She knew Ethan Voss would strike back, and just as she expected the next morning, Voss Logic held a press conference. Ethan appeared calm, but his eyes were cold. "We confirmed that the submitted code produced a valid result," he said evenly, pausing for effect. "However, it is a divergent variant. It is no longer the original Genesis code." His words ignited immediate controversy. Some nodded in agreement. Others questioned divergent, or corrected. Miles texted Amara, "He's twisting the truth." She replied simply, "I knew he would." That afternoon, Amara received an email from the summit organizers. "We invite you to participate in the Global Algorithm Finals as an independent team. The final problem will be personally proposed by Ethan Voss." She understood what it meant: a direct challenge. 3 teams, MIT, Stanford, and her, alone. No equipment, no support. But if she refused, Ethan would reclaim his reputation. If she accepted, she could force him to face the truth. Amara typed back, "I accept." The next day, inside the grand hall of the Global Algorithm Summit, thousands of attendees, hundreds of journalists, and millions watching live held their breath. When the host announced independent contestant Amara Cole, every camera turned toward the small woman in a pale shirt, her hair neatly tied back. She walked onto the stage, alone. Ethan sat in the front row, his face unreadable, but his eyes revealed what he wanted: not her victory, but her public collapse. The head judge revealed the challenge: infinite bridge paradox, a problem never before solved. The audience murmured. It was a legendary problem, one that had been removed from multiple conferences for being deemed unsolvable, and now it was being presented live broadcast, worldwide. Ethan glanced at Amara, the corner of his mouth curling into a smirk. She didn't flinch. She wasn't shocked or nervous. She had seen this problem before a leaked draft from the previous year. It wasn't meant to be solved, only to test who had the courage to confront it. On the other side of the stage, the MIT and Stanford teams activated their models, AI systems, and quantum computers. Amara had only a whiteboard, a marker, and her mind. A reporter whispered from below, "She's being made a spectacle," but another voice quietly replied, "Or maybe the spectacle will belong to the one who set the trap." Ethan watched her every move. He didn't need to speak. All he wanted was for the world to witness her fall. But Amara understood one thing clearly: to surpass a wall, you don't have to break it. You only need to find the door its builder was too afraid to see. The timer began to count down. 60 minutes. A problem that had never been solved. A lone woman stood among 3 teams of the world's top scientists while the entire world watched. The problem was called the infinite bridge paradox, a mathematical labyrinth built from 3 domains: number theory, topological geometry, and quantum convergence. Each on its own was enough to overwhelm even the best minds. But Ethan Voss had combined all 3 into a closed maze with no way out. At the MIT and Stanford tables, countless AI algorithms were running simultaneously, parallel models, quantum servers, inference systems, all working at once. Technical assistants hurried to replace papers, update data, and feed new prompts. In the center of the stage, Amara stood alone. She didn't open her laptop. She didn't type. She simply stared at the whiteboard marker in hand, silent. A judge tilted his head. She's not doing anything, but then Amara began to write. Curves, strange symbols, nothing resembling any formula from textbooks. Online, thousands of comments poured in. She has no idea what she's doing. Who let a coffee waitress on stage? This is staged for drama. Yet some voices disagreed. Look at how she places her parentheses. That's not random. That's a Tier 3 logic diagram. Only a handful of people even attempt that. Amara was drawing a bridge. She divided the problem into 3 segments, 3 independent logical domains. But instead of attacking them directly, she searched for their intersections, not through conventional mathematics, but through spatial intuition. She wasn't solving the problem. She was reading it like unfolding a map no one had dared to open. In the audience, Ethan began to pay attention. 10 minutes passed. MIT was still stuck. Stanford's systems were crashing due to data conflicts. Meanwhile, Amara had already connected the first 2 domains. She wrote, "Infinity is not merely endless. It is the journey of direction." The judges exchanged looks. One quietly approached the board, his eyes lighting up. "She's creating a 3-dimensional coordinate field for logical convergence," he whispered. "No one's ever attempted that." Online sentiment shifted. New hashtags emerged. Infinity. Mapper. She sees bridges. On stage, Ethan narrowed his eyes. He rose from his seat and walked slowly toward the MIT team, though his gaze never left the opposite side of the stage. He wasn't studying them. He was studying her board. He couldn't spot a single flaw. But what he did see was a path he had never imagined. "Impossible," he muttered. "She has only memory, no equipment, no team." Amara kept writing. The final pattern appeared a Fibonacci spiral nested within a Mandelbrot structure, an interactive bridge between logical modeling and geometric mathematics, something never before seen in foundational theory. Suddenly, she stopped. One last line. She wrote slowly, deliberately. "The problem doesn't lie in the solution, but in how we define limits." Then she set the marker down. 12 minutes remained. She stepped away from the board, nodded to the judges, and said quietly, "I'm done. I don't need any more time." The entire hall fell silent. A judge opened the verification system, inputting Amara's handwritten model. The system ran 3 cycles. No errors, no conflicts, no exceptions. The result, perfect stability. MIT and Stanford froze in disbelief. Ethan Voss clenched his jaw. For the first time, someone had refused to follow the path he designed. She hadn't broken his wall. She had found the invisible door he never thought to look for. The room seemed to stop breathing. When Amara lowered her marker, no one clapped. No one spoke. The judges, the contestants, the thousands of people watching live, all were silent, frozen by the impossible moment they had just witnessed. The countdown clock on stage kept ticking. 9 minutes. 8. But the only contestant without a team had already stepped away from the whiteboard with quiet certainty. At the verification desk, Professor Leona Frost entered Amara's handwritten formulas into the central simulation system. The entire room held its breath. A soft chime rang out light as air, yet it hit like thunder. "Accepted stable convergence model verified." The message flashed across the giant screen behind Amara. A few people shot to their feet. A young judge slapped his forehead. A visiting professor from Cambridge leaned in to study her diagram closely. It wasn't just correct, it was transcendent. Because she hadn't simply solved the problem, she had redefined how it could be seen. Ethan Voss rose abruptly from his VIP seat. Every eye turned toward him. The man who had worn a confident smile through every competition for the past decade now stood silent. He walked toward the stage. The lights, the cameras, the murmurs all faded into the background. Only Amara and Ethan remained, two opposite worlds standing face to face. Ethan glanced at the whiteboard, then at her. "I created the infinite bridge as an unsolvable paradox," he said quietly. Every research team got lost in the separation of its three domains. Amara's reply was calm, because they believed it was three problems. But to me, it was three parts of one structure. His brow furrowed confusion and unease, flickering across his face. She continued, "A limit isn't the end. It's the boundary, waiting to be bridged." The words made Leona Frost step back one hand over her chest as if struck by a truth too obvious, yet long forgotten. Ethan looked around. Cameras zoomed in on every expression. Behind him, millions were watching the live stream. On a cracked phone screen in South Baldwin, a boy named Malik was watching too. Ethan understood then if he denied her, he'd be buried in doubt. If he acknowledged her, he'd surrender the throne he'd built over 15 years. Leona stepped to the center of the stage. "Mr. Ethan Voss, according to the rules, if the creator of the problem confirms the result, victory goes to the first contestant to complete it." Silence. A long one. Ethan turned back to the board, then to her. He nodded a slow, heavy nod, bitter but inevitable. "I confirm she's correct, and she deserves the win." No cheers, no applause, only truth spoken aloud. And everyone knew they had just witnessed something rare, the bow of a man once thought unbeatable. On the main screen, the final result appeared, "Winner, Amara Cole Independent Team." The hashtags, "Ra Bridgebreaker," "Waitress Wins," and "Infinity Unlocked" simultaneously shot to the top of the global trends. CNN cut off its panel discussion to replay the moment the girl who solved the unsolvable writing by hand on a whiteboard. And Amara. She didn't raise her hands or give a victory speech. She simply looked toward a small camera, the one Malik was watching through. In their cramped apartment miles away, the boy smiled, gripping a pencil tightly and scribbling across his notebook a line he'd learned from his sister: "A limit is where the mind begins to build a bridge." The girl once called the cleaning lady had made the world look up, and it had all begun with one misplaced minus sign. The next morning, the world woke up to a single name, Amara Cole. BBC's morning broadcast opened with her image standing before the whiteboard light, reflecting off her messy hair, a marker in her hand. Her face calm, as if she had just finished a small calculation in a cramped kitchen, not in front of hundreds of millions of viewers. The woman who rewrote the definition of genius. Single-handedly defeated elite teams from MIT and Stanford. She didn't come from a laboratory, she came from a cafe. The entire internet roared. Reporters tracked down every place she had ever worked. Her tiny apartment was surrounded by cameras. She asked Malik to lock all her personal accounts and remove every trace of information from social platforms. She turned off her phone. She didn't open her laptop. She lay on the sofa staring at the ceiling, her heart conflicted. She was supposed to feel proud, wasn't she? But instead, she felt exposed, like she had accidentally touched a layer of knowledge that not everyone wanted to see. Then a message arrived in her conference inbox. "I want to meet you." Privately. Ethan. No explanation, no schedule, no location. But she understood. That message carried something more dangerous than any algorithm, the intent of a man who had never been defeated. That afternoon, in a small, weathered cafe tucked deep inside Bushwick's art district, Amara walked in. In a shadowed corner, Ethan Voss was already waiting. No entourage, no media, no luxury electric car parked outside like before. Just a man quiet. He didn't look like a billionaire CEO, but like a scholar who had just lost the most important chapter of his thesis. She sat down without a greeting. Ethan studied her for a long time before speaking. "You didn't break my code," he said softly. "You untangled the limits inside my own mind." She didn't respond. He continued. "I spent more than 10 years designing the structure of quantum convergence. It was my life's work. You came along, and with nothing but a marker, one simple line, you made the entire system collapse." His voice carried no anger, only honesty. She answered quietly, "I didn't intend to make anyone collapse. I only followed what was right." Ethan looked down at his untouched black coffee. "Right," he repeated. "That's exactly why you're dangerous." He pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper, still clearly showing her handwriting. The code revision that defeated Genesis. "I didn't come here to apologize nor for revenge," he said. "I came to warn you." Her eyes narrowed tense. "You just did something no one has dared to do," he said. "And because of that, you won't be left alone. There are people who don't care whether you're right or wrong. They only care about who holds the pen that writes the rules. And yesterday you touched that pen." Her brow furrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "No." Ethan shook his head. "I'm speaking to you with the rare respect I give only to someone who once proved me wrong." He stood, leaving his full cup behind, and added one final line. "You may not need the system, but the system cannot exist without controlling people like you." When he left, only the cold scent of coffee remained. Amara sat still, her heart heavy. His warning wasn't revenge, it was truth. And she knew her path from here would not be simple. She returned home, powered on her devices, after 24 hours offline. Hundreds of collaboration offers, interview requests, and sponsorship proposals flooded her inbox. But among the glamour were messages from the global copyright organization, AI law firms, and urgent employment invitations from corporations that had never acknowledged her existence. She skimmed through them all and clicked on one email. "Amara, you've shifted the direction of the entire field of modern mathematics. Come see me, Leona." At the bottom was a set of coordinates to a small building, the Institute of Intuitive Mathematics. She understood. The battle of algorithms had just opened a new door. She was no longer the waitress who broke the code. She was now the one redefining the limits of human thought. The building sat hidden among the maple woods west of Princeton, 3 stories of gray brick, no sign, no title, only a small plaque by the door that read, Institute of Intuitive Mathematics. Amara stood before the wooden doors, feeling half curious, half uncertain. No one greeted her. No security cameras. She pushed the door open and stepped inside and realized this place was unlike any research institute she had ever seen. There were no long tables lined with laptops, no monitoring screens, no sound of typing. Instead, There was warm, golden light walls covered in blackboards, shelves stacked with old books, and traces of chalk writing still lingering from half-finished thoughts. In the corner, a woman in a cardigan was writing with a purple ink pen. Leona Frost looked up, her gaze gentle yet piercing. "Welcome, Amara." Amara nodded slightly. "I thought the Institute would be bigger." Leona smiled. "The world only remembers the glittering labs, but the ideas that change the world usually begin in old, quiet rooms like this." Amara glanced around. "What does this institute study?" "We study mathematical intuition." Leona said, the kind no university can teach. The same thing you demonstrated before hundreds of millions of people when you solved an unsolved problem, not through formula, but through geometric instinct and the language of connection. Leona stood and led her down a narrow hallway. The walls were filled with scattered symbols and equations, fragments of something unfinished. Everyone here, she continued, was once rejected by traditional systems of education. Some were mechanics, some were chefs, some once lived on the streets. But all share one gift: the ability to notice what others are too distracted to see. Amara slowed her steps. She saw a young man drawing motion trajectories with his left hand on the wall while tapping jazz rhythms with his right. A girl was modeling geometric equations with clay and flashlight beams. No computers, no words, only pure concentration so intense it felt sacred. "Do you see?" Leona asked softly. "No one here is trying to prove they're right. They're listening to mathematics itself." Amara stood still. After all the noise and chaos of the world, this place felt like a hallway leading back to the origin of thought, where before language, before equations, there was a quiet awareness that the world could be understood differently. Leona turned to her. "I didn't invite you here to offer a title," she said, "but to ask, do you want to go further? Not on the public stage, but in the silence where new knowledge is born." Amara hesitated. She thought of Ethan's warning of the eyes of corporations trying to buy the intuitive patent she hadn't even named, of the interviews and offers flooding her inbox. Then she remembered that first night in the small apartment, Malik studying math under the dim yellow light, and the first diagram she had drawn on the back of an electric bill. No awards, no sponsorships. Only a quiet calling that the things not yet named still needed someone to keep walking toward them. She looked at Leona. "I don't need an office or a title," she said. "But if this institute is a place to continue listening to what hasn't yet been written, then I'd like to stay." Leona nodded. "Good." She handed Amara a piece of white chalk, half-worn, unboxed, unnamed. "Here, we don't need degrees. Only honesty toward what you can see before others understand it." Amara accepted it. Her hand trembled slightly. Outside, autumn was arriving. Leaves drifted down like gold. No applause, no cameras. Only silence, the kind that belongs to those who are quietly rewriting the world one line at a time. 3 months had passed since the day Amara stepped into the Institute of Intuitive Mathematics. Life there was quiet. No headlines, no stage lights. Every morning she arrived early, brewed her own coffee, wrote on the blackboard, then erased it before anyone could see. Not because she feared mistakes, but because she knew that some ideas only become clear after you've been brave enough to write them wrong a few times. She spent hours studying the infinity drift model, a concept she had created herself, where limits were not absolute, but shifted like the path of wind. There were no fixed boundaries, only zones of coexistence between what was possible and what had yet to be named. Leona watched her from afar, never intervening, only occasionally asking one question. "Does it still make you curious?" Amara always nodded. One early winter afternoon, as light snow began to fall outside, the Institute received a special email from the Department of Defense Technology Division. Subject: emergency application of the infinity drift model in national encryption algorithms. Leona printed the letter and handed it to Amara. "You knew this day would come," she said. "Sooner than we expected." Amara read each line carefully. Words like national security, top secret clearance, and request for structural handover glimmered on the page like a thin blade. "I didn't design this model to create codes for war," she said. Leona nodded. "And yet we can't keep it locked away forever if it could save lives." The conflict struck Amara hard. The battle between protecting the purity of knowledge and accepting that the world outside would inevitably try to claim it. The next morning, Ethan Voss appeared at the Institute without notice, without an escort. He walked into the main hall in a long gray coat, his face stripped of arrogance, replaced by something heavier guilt. "You've created something no one, not even I, can control," he said quietly, "and now they want it." Amara stood. "Are you here to negotiate or to warn me?" He paused. "Both." He opened his briefcase and laid a contract on the table. It was a full transfer agreement selling all rights to Infinity Drift to the Global Security Federation. The terms were clear. Amara would remain anonymous, her identity concealed, and she would have no say in how the model was used. She read every word, then looked directly into his eyes. "I didn't create this model to be nameless." Ethan froze, then spoke the most honest sentence he'd ever said. But, don't you people like you have never been allowed to have their names on things like this?" Amara said nothing, but her mind filled with images of her mother, the woman who taught her arithmetic using coins, and Malek, her brother who once said, "Sis, I want to be a mathematician like you, but I've never seen anyone like me get to be one." They had told her that intuition wasn't a method, that instinct wasn't part of the curriculum, that she needed degrees, credentials, validation. But the only thing she ever needed was honesty with what she saw. Amara pushed the contract back toward Ethan. "I'm going to publish it," she said, firmly, "openly, freely, with a clear statement not for military use, not for population control, and absolutely not for the enrichment of a privileged few." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "They'll crush you. They'll laugh in your face." She smiled, calm and certain. "I've cleaned tables for people who laughed in my face before, but they're the ones who spilled the most valuable equations right onto those tables." He said nothing more, only nodded for the first time, as if accepting that brilliance could rise from places no system could ever measure. When Ethan left, Amara returned to the board. She began writing the first lines of the official publication, Infinity Drift, a mathematical structure for those who were never believed to be smart enough to create it. 2 weeks after Amara released the Infinity Drift model as open source, the internet erupted once again. No media promotion, no PR campaign, just a simple link posted on a decentralized coding platform with a note: free, non-commercial, not for use in weapons or population control. Within 6 hours, it had over 2 million downloads. 14 hours later, her post had been translated into 17 languages. A day after that, independent research teams from Nairobi, Jakarta, and Lima simultaneously announced early applications of the model breakthroughs in decoding genetic medicine, optimizing renewable energy networks, and processing emergency signals in disaster zones. No organization held exclusive rights. No power center was allowed to steer the direction. A new mathematical language had begun its journey without a passport. But on the other side, the world's largest tech corporations were not silent. Ethan Voss was summoned to testify before the Global Technology Commission. The heads of major investment funds demanded an explanation. Why was such a monumental development allowed to escape market control? For the first time in his career, Ethan did not defend himself. He simply said, "Because this time we were wrong to believe that value could be defined by ownership." His words did not earn him forgiveness, but they left the room in silence. Elsewhere, far from the noise of finance, Amara sat in her workspace, facing a whiteboard filled with new diagrams. She was already developing an extension of her model unprogrammed self-learning logic, a field once dismissed as undefined and impractical. Malik sat by the window doing his 8th grade math homework. He looked up and asked Sis, if a computer doesn't need to be taught step by step, can it learn like our brain does? Amara smiled, answering without turning around. It can learn in its own way. But the more important question is, who does it learn for? He nodded, not fully understanding, but wrote that sentence at the top of his notebook. At that same moment, during the Global Tech Forum in Singapore, a question broke the air in a panel of scholars. Does the fact that a woman of color with no formal degree has created an entirely new branch of mathematics prove that our education system is inherently exclusionary? The hall fell silent. The moderator, an English professor, sighed softly. We call people like her exceptions. But maybe it's the system that's been too good at making sure they never become the rule. Back at the Institute of Intuitive Mathematics, Leona stopped by Amara's room. A university in France wants you to head its program. A research foundation in the Netherlands is offering you 10 years of funding. What do you want to choose? Amara erased the whiteboard and smiled. I don't want to become a symbol. I just want to keep being the one who holds the chalk, because every stroke could open a new door. Leona smiled gently. All right, but if you ever grow tired, remember there are many people out there walking further because you've gone ahead. That night, Amara opened her mailbox. A handwritten letter rare in this age from a young girl in Bolivia, her handwriting still uneven. I used to believe intelligence belonged only to those who studied at big schools. But when I saw you standing alone at that whiteboard, I realized true intelligence is believing in what you understand, even when no one else believes with you. Amara read it, folded it carefully, and placed it in a small wooden box where she kept things that don't need proof. She looked out of the window. The first snow of the season had begun to fall. No noise, no stage lights, no hashtags, only a quiet truth spreading like an underground current. A single grain of sand, if it lands in the right place, can shift the axis of an entire machine. And sometimes one crack deep enough can make even the hardest wall question how strong it really is. 6 months after Infinity Drift was released, the worlds of academia and technology were still divided. Some called it the secession of classical mathematics. Others described Amara as the alchemist of modern thought. But to her, all those praises were nothing more than ripples of smoke drifting across a still lake, beautiful, but never the root of what mattered. She still came to the Institute of Intuitive Mathematics every day, made coffee, wiped the board, wrote an equation, erased it, wrote it again differently, then erased it once more. Not because she doubted herself, but because she understood something deeper. Being right was not always the destination. Sometimes it was a bridge stretched between two perspectives. On December 12th, the Institute hosted its first open symposium since infinity drift had been adopted for trial use in over 200 research centers. There was no grand announcement, no live stream, no ticketed entry. Only a modest note posted on an independent mathematics forum. If you have ever been rejected for thinking differently, come and share. Yet that afternoon, the second-floor hall meant to hold no more than 30 people was overflowing. People sat along the aisles, crowded the balcony, and even gathered outside in the parking lot, listening through makeshift speakers. A farmer from New Mexico, once denied entry to his local university for lacking a high school diploma, stood up to share the water balancing system he designed using logarithmic patterns. A 14-year-old girl from Senegal came with her grandmother carrying hand-drawn charts of number cycles she called the heartbeat of the earth. A young man from Japan, blind since birth, spoke about perceiving spatial geometry through sound. He said, "I can hear shapes before I describe them." No one interrupted. No one laughed. Amara sat quietly at the back of the room listening. At the end of the session, Leona approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's time for you to name yourself," she said. Amara nodded and walked forward. No microphone, no LED screen. Just a single whiteboard marker waiting on the tray. She wrote one word, language. Then turned to the crowd, a sea of faces, all ages, colors, and professions, but bound by one thing: each had learned to make silence their survival. "We are not lacking intelligence," she began, her voice calm. "We are lacking a language to recognize intelligence that doesn't come from the expected places." She wrote a second word, name. Without names, ideas cannot exist. No one can find what has never been spoken. But for how long, she continued, have we allowed the right to name new ideas to belong to a select few while dismissing the rest? Her eyes swept the room. We call them dreamers. Naive, uneducated. But they are only the ones who were never given a whiteboard. Then she wrote the final phrase, the answer. "The answer isn't found in textbooks or titles," she said softly. "It lives in the courage of those who trust their intuition even when no one else believes with them." No one clapped. Yet the silence in that moment was not hesitation, it was transformation. Something in the room had shifted. A small movement, but profound. That evening, Amara returned to her office and opened her email. One new message stood out: Nomination Invitation, UNESCO Global Knowledge Creation Award. She read it and exhaled, not from pride, but from the quiet recognition that once she had believed her name would never stand beside the word knowledge. Instead of replying, she opened an old document draft and began writing the preface of a book she had dreamed of since her days as a waitress at LeClaire Mathematics for those once told they were wrong. The cover would bear no photo, her name printed small. Only a simple line at the bottom of the first page, dedicated to everyone who was ever laughed at for asking their first question. The following week, schools in the Philippines began experimenting with infinity drift-based teaching methods. A team of programmers in Estonia developed an AI that used intuitive logic learning not from old data, but from its own imagination. Traditional mathematicians remained divided. But one thing was undeniable. A quiet current was rising. A new language was emerging, one that needed no translation. A mathematics that didn't ask, "Where did you study?" but rather, "What do you see that others do not?" And you, the one listening to these final words. Have you ever been underestimated? Interrupted mid-thought, because your voice sounded different. Hidden your ideas out of fear someone would call them foolish? If so, leave a single dot in the comments. No explanation needed. No defense. will understand. If you remember the first person who ever believed in you, write their name. And if no one ever has, then believe me now, you are not alone. And if you still believe in the ideas no one has written on the board, yet follow Blacktail's stories, because maybe the next story the world is waiting for is the one you're quietly writing each night. Because genius is not born from rankings, but from courage, the courage to step up to the whiteboard when the whole room still doubts you.